Welcome to the Queer Spirit Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Venegoni. Here we have conversations with artists, healers, and activists who enliven the LGBTQ communities and who empower our queer spirits to flourish. Today I speak with the hosts of the Queer Money Podcast, David Auten and John Schneider. David and John are personal finance authors, bloggers, and speakers for debtfreeguys.com with over 35 years of combined experience in finance. Their Queer Money podcast is the only show talking about the financial nuances of the LGBT community. Their mission is to support a financially strong queer community. Today they share how they overcame personal debt and became the debt-free guys. We talk specifically about debt within the queer communities and its links to mental health. They share some ideas about how to begin to cultivate financial health for your future. To find out more about their financial services and tools, go to debtfreeguys.com. And to listen to their show, the Queer Money Podcast, just search Queer Money on your favorite podcast player. Hi guys, welcome to the show.
Hello there, thank you for having us.
Hi.
So I wanted to start out by having you share with us the story of how you first came to creating Debt-Free Guys.
Oh, that's a long story. So about a year and a half after David and I got together, after he made me his boyfriend, we finally had our second coming out experience where we confessed to each other how horrible we were with our finances. Between the two of us, we had $51,000 in credit card debt. And the irony was at the time we had 13 years of combined experience in financial services. So we were helping other people with their money, but we weren't helping ourselves. And we figured, we're messing things up. Our lives aren't going the direction that we wanted them to go. Why are we living this way and sabotaging ourselves? And we finally came up with a plan to pay off our debt. We actually paid it off in 2.5 years. And toward the end of paying off that debt, we thought, well, between our professional experience and our personal experience, we had a lot of information that we could use to help other people who are struggling with credit card debt. And we had the bright idea of writing a book. And because we thought that if you write a book and you publish it, then Oprah invites you on her TV show and you become rich and famous. But that's not at all how it works.
And then your debt would disappear after Oprah.
Right.
Exactly. No more debt after that. Fortunately, though, when we were shopping the book to different agents, we got a lot of positive feedback. The one problem was that because we didn't already have a platform, no agent was going to take a risk on us. It was, nobody was going to buy our book, right? Because they didn't know who we were. And one of the agents told us that, and we thought, okay, well, here we thought the book was the platform, but we started to brainstorm and think about what could we do to kind of broaden our platform. And having a TV show or a radio show at that point in time wasn't really within the realm of possibility. So we decided to start our personal finance blog.
Yeah.
And that was in
2013 is when we really started, but we weren't doing it in earnest, and we actually had it as a different name. Back then, it was more aligned with our book, which was our book is The 4 Principles of a Debt-Free Life. And so that our blog was titled Principles of a Debt-Free Life, or actually it was called debtfreeprinciples.com. And then we had a serious conversation about this is something we really need to get serious about. And that's when we became the Debt-Free Guys and started our blog with a little bit more of our story rather than just personal finance advice.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious what it was like for each of you to know that you had all that debt and who told who first.
Well, I think it was surprising to both of us because it just so happened that we were both in the same industry. And I think we both thought that the other must be doing better than I am.
Or hoping at least. So.
And so I think it was kind of surprising. I mean, we did live together at that point for about a year. So we did sort of watch how each other spent. We kind of knew the positions that each other had in our industry. So kind of had a gauge of what we were earning. And so I guess we kind of, in hindsight, we probably should have realized we were both doing poorly, but I think we kind of in that puppy love phase where we didn't really care, right? We just wanted to look good, have fun, and go to great places together. And it wasn't until we kind of had a come to Jesus moment that David can share much more eloquently than I can that we kind of had that confessional.
Yeah, so I don't know if being locked in a car together for an hour and a half is eloquent, but so we had gone to the mountains to see a friend of John's. We lived in Denver, Colorado, so we had gone up into the mountains to visit a friend of John's from college. And we had a great time in this little town, Winter Park. We had been there before, but for some reason, this particular trip, it really resonated with us. And we thought to ourselves, we could really see ourselves spending a lot more time here. This would be a great place for a vacation home. So we stopped at a realtor's office. We checked out real estate. We got into the car and started driving home with this fantasy idea of buying land and building a house. I love modern architecture. I've always wanted to design and build my own home. And so that was kind of the idea. So we had an hour and a half drive ahead of us. And our conversation started at this high elevation of how great things would be. We would be able to invite our friends and we'd be able to go up there on the weekends. It's only an hour and 15 minutes away. And we just had this amazing conversation. And as we drove down towards Denver, it was almost like as if when we dropped in elevation, the level of our enthusiasm for this dropped as well. We went from buying land and building a house to maybe buying something that already existed to maybe just renting something long term. By the time we got to Denver, we were really talking about how we were financial messes. And we opened up the door to our place and literally we walked down a flight of stairs into a basement apartment. So an hour and a half earlier, we were having this fantasy conversation about buying land and building a vacation home, but we didn't even own a home yet to vacation away from. And it just kind of, we realized at that point that we were physically and financially living in a hole. And it became very real to us at that moment that our lives were not heading in the direction that we wanted them to head, that if we kept going on this same path, we would probably still be living in that basement apartment or something close to it, because we just, as our income had grown over the previous couple of years, so had our expenditures. And we just were not thinking clearly about what we wanted from the future. We were just living in the moment.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, because it sounds like you started accruing this debt before you met each other. What do you think led to that amount of debt growing to the level that it had?
Yeah, so David was more of a nickel and dimer, and he had his percentage of that debt considerably longer than I did, although my percentage was much larger. I was more of a big spender. I would put gigantic unnecessary expenses on my credit card. But I think kind of deeper answer to your question to us is, how did we get to the point where we acquired that so much debt to begin with? And that was one of the questions that we started to ask ourselves when we sort of had this aha moment. And it took us several years to really realize it, because we had to really peel back the onion and dig deep. But we realized that in hindsight, we acquired that debt for predominantly two reasons. One, we were trying to make up for childhoods where we sort of felt inadequate, inferior, where we were bullied and picked on because we were gay and treated differently. But then on the flip side, when we finally had the courage to come out of the closet and we found our queer community at that time, mostly gay men, we were so insecure about ourselves and wanted so desperately to fit in that we felt like if we didn't have the right clothing, if we didn't have the right cars, didn't go on the right vacations, didn't attend all the parties, that we wouldn't be accepted. So it was sort of that two-pronged reason for why we sort of ultimately acquired as much debt as we did.
Mm-hmm. And did it take any soul searching to get to a place where you thought, okay, now that I'm out and I'm a little older now, I can shift my relationship with money and my relationship with how I spend it and material goods?
Yeah, so one of the other questions we started to ask ourselves is, what is it we really want most in life? And we often say that we enjoyed going to the fancy happy hours and all the parties and having the expensive clothing, but they weren't really what was fueling our soul. What we found out through kind of digging deep and understanding ourselves a little bit better was that we wanted to travel much more extensively than we already had. Maybe that's the stereotype in us, but we're two gays who love to travel. But we wanted to start doing that on cash and not on credit. And we also wanted to save for a financially secure retirement. So we apparently learned something in all of our years in financial services. But then we also wanted to be able to give back to our community. And when we started to pay off our credit card debt, coming up with a strategy to pay that off, we realized that we didn't really have any time or money to give to our community because we were so broke. And only because we've been able to pay off our debt have we been able to give more of our time and money, and then also build a business that serves our community in our own special way.
Mm. So when Debt Free Guys first started, was it already directed at the LGBT community, or was it just sort of general?
No. So we wrote the book and we started Debt Free Principles, and then Debt Free Guys we didn't hide the fact that we were a gay couple. It just wasn't rainbow pictures all over our website. It wasn't until we went to FinCon in 2015. Was that right? We went to FinCon in 2015, and FinCon is a personal finance blogging conference that kind of connects bloggers and authors, podcasts to media such as NBC, Wall Street Journal, and whatnot. And the first year we went, there were about 900 attendees, and we realized that there were all sort of different niches. There were military veterans, and there were Christians and millennials and African-American women, all sort of talking to their niche, people who looked or were like them. And David and I realized, as well as several people told us at that point, that we were the only out gay couple there. And we kind of took that information and we thought, well, if there's nobody serving our community and we're a gay couple, maybe this is our opportunity, or maybe this is our responsibility. And so that was when we decided, we went home, we kind of re-strategized a little bit, and that was kind of where we started to go a little bit more gay on our website. And that's when shortly after that, we launched our podcast, Queer Money.
So tell our listeners a little bit more about your podcast.
Sure. So our podcast originally was designed to just be another way of talking to the community, sharing stories, and maybe giving ideas or tips on things, talking about our own mistakes. And we started it as a 13-week kind of trial on a video platform that was called Blab. It doesn't exist anymore. And we fumbled our way through it. The platform was not very user-friendly, and so we just didn't feel like it was working for us. So we were about ready to give up. And I will say, when you do something like that and you put a lot of effort into it and nothing really happens, it's not productive, there's all these emotions that get associated with it, right? I'm a failure, or we could have done better, and you just look back and you criticize and judge yourself. But what was interesting is we were on the very last week, we hadn't recorded it yet, but the very last week we were doing it, we get a message from someone at Huffington Post saying, if you guys want to continue this, we'd be happy to share it on our platform, which really inspired us. We thought, okay, so somebody is listening. Not just the 2 or 3 of our friends who would show up every week to listen, but there were a few more. And so we decided that we would continue. We would turn it into both an audio and a video podcast. The video portion of it didn't last very long, just simply for the fact that we didn't have the production capabilities. And we were preparing ourselves to live a little bit more frugal lifestyle, because we both wanted eventually to have this be what supported us. So we didn't have a lot of money to be able to spend on production. So we went to just being audio. And as we did the audio, it started to pick up a little bit of attention, but we were still surprised that it wasn't going a whole lot, wasn't going anywhere really. And maybe 9 months after we had started, we no longer had the support of Huffington Post. We were starting to feel sorry for ourselves again. And the universe, we were talking about giving up. And the universe said, no, you can't. Someone from a large financial services company reached out to us and said, we'd love to partner with you guys on this. And that was MassMutual, and we were very thankful for that. They ended up being a sponsor of our podcast for several 13-week stints. And it was by working with them, having some money to cover production costs, that allowed us then to increase the podcast. And what we've really found for ourselves from the podcast is that we love doing it because we hear other stories of success. The focus is queer money. We give money tips, but we like to highlight the stories of other individuals in our community that are doing great things. And it doesn't always mean that it translates into amazing financial success. For some individuals, it's just the fact that they have navigated a very difficult point in their life, maybe transitioning and the costs associated with transitioning, telling those kinds of stories, or telling the stories of what it's like for a lesbian couple to decide that they don't need to have all the organic food and drive the right car, that what they really want is they want to spend more time together, so they're going to live a financially independent life by giving up on many of the things that many people think that they need. So we've had a lot of fun telling those kinds of stories. We're actually just getting into starting a whole series about individuals who have made those kind of financial decisions. We're calling it Queer Money Masters. And really what these individuals have done is they've in some way mastered money in their lives. And we'll highlight a story like that. most likely for about a 6 to 8 month period. And what we're really highlighting is as John mentioned, there's so few other LGBT individuals in the personal finance space, but there are a few, and their voices aren't loud enough. And right now, our podcast is doing well, and we need to amplify those voices. We need to get those voices out. Being two cis gay white men, we can only speak from one perspective. And so having a lesbian couple or a transgender individual or couple, other queer individuals come on and tell their story, we need to drive individuals who resonate with their story to them so they can connect and they can. Our whole goal with Queer Money and with Debt Free Guys is we believe in a strong queer community, and we believe that a pillar of a strong queer community are strong individuals also need to be financially strong. If we're not financially strong, we're distracted with so many other things. So that's what what the podcast is focusing on.
Great. Yeah, when I first found it, I was really excited to see it and was inspired by all of the different topics and guests that you had on. I mean, I think the first episode that I listened to that really stood out to me was how to talk to your partner, about having financial conversations with your partner, and the free worksheet that you offered to download. Because that's helpful not only for me, but in my practice of therapy with couples or even with individuals who come in and say they want to talk to their partner about money. They struggle a lot with that. And, so I think that your vision of helping the LGBT community to talk about money is really important, because I don't know what your socio-financial background was in your family growing up, but I don't think it really matters, because for a lot of queer people, they could end up having to leave their family and losing that financial support. And then they have a lot of shame about who they are, on top of shame around having money or not being able to support themselves and having to go and do things that they don't want to do. And so I think it's really important that you are bringing these messages into all the different communities, because people aren't really talking about it.
Right. Yeah, thank you. The reason that we did that particular episode about couples talking about money is that is the most common reoccurring question we get from our listeners and people in our Facebook group. How can I get my partner on the same page, or how can I just get my partner to talk about money with me? And we think it's kind of fascinating. So we answered that several times in sort of one-off discussions, and we thought, well, this must be a podcast topic because people keep asking it.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I would say if we hadn't been locked in a car together for an hour and a half having that discussion, I don't know if we would have broached that topic as early on in our relationship as we did. We may have let it go for many more years, like we are now seeing with many individuals in our group, in the community, that they have let years and years go by without understanding what kind of financial state they're in as a couple.
Mm-hmm. So I would say, pro tip both from you, and I can also attest to this, if you want to have a conversation with your partner, go on a road trip. I also wanted to talk a little bit about one of your recent episodes where you guys really shared a lot of vulnerable information with your listeners. And I also think it's important to demonstrate that even though you've been doing this for a while and got on top of your finances and started your business, that there are still ways that we can not succeed the way we want to. So I wonder if you could share with our listeners in a nutshell what that episode was about and what you talked about.
Well, we didn't bring our tissues, so I don't know if we're prepared for this. But so it's a funny meme that you can see several iterations of it on Facebook and Instagram, but it's basically like the roller coaster of emotions that an entrepreneur goes through. And you can go through these highs, such as when Experian and Mass Mutual or Huffington Post reach out to you and ask for some sort of a partnership. But then you can experience really deep lows when you feel like you're rejected or something doesn't launch the way that you had hoped that it would launch. And we had, toward the end of last year, the lease on our apartment that we were renting at the time came up, and friends of ours who live in Columbia, Pennsylvania, asked if we would house sit for them for 4 months while they traveled the southern United States. And we thought, okay, this is a great opportunity. Our lease is up. This would give us a place to stay for 4 months. It would also put me close to my family, who's in central Pennsylvania as well. We thought this would be a great experience. And we were in launch phase of our credit card payoff course. And we had a lot of positive feedback from the universe and a lot of support from different financial services companies and media. And based on that and a lot of the statistics that we see out there, with regard to credit card debt for the general population, as well as specifically for the LGBT community, we thought that we were going to have just an amazing success with the launch of our course. And so we hustled hard. We were putting all sorts of effort into it, and we just were expecting astronomical results. And that didn't turn out the way that we had hoped it would turn out. It came in on par with what's the norm for a first launch of a course like ours, but it didn't sort of break any records. And so that was like, we kind of interpreted that as sort of an element of failure. And then shortly after that, we were a bank that we had been in pretty deep discussions with about doing the Queer Money Live tour in the Rocky Mountain region, had backed out. And so we kind of got two punches pretty much in a 2-week period. And we were, not only were those difficult experiences for us individually, but then we were also living in central Pennsylvania, which where we were living didn't feel like the most welcoming place for a gay couple. We certainly weren't out, and we never held hands, and we tried to play down our homosexuality when we were walking around the neighborhood and out and about in the community. And we were kind of cut off from all of our attachments. So we didn't, when we were in Denver, it was a much more liberal area. We were able to hold hands walking down the street without feeling any sort of risk. We could easily walk to a bar or restaurant. The park was just down the street. We had all of our friends in our community kind of in the area. So we had a lot of things that we could rely on when things get bad. And when we were in Colombia, we didn't really have anything to rely on. And things were so, hindsight, it's kind of funny, but we had so few attachments that in fact there was no liquor store in town. So Dave and I love wine, and we couldn't even go and get a glass of a decent wine in town. So we had really no other opportunities but to sort of face what was going on with ourselves. And here all along, we had thought that in the process of figuring out how we got and why we got into credit card debt, we thought we had sort of peeled back the onion and understood ourselves a lot. We didn't realize until when we were in Colombia and we had all these experiences culminating at one time, did we realize that we actually still had a lot to learn about ourselves and still had a lot of negative feelings about ourselves, a lot of personal growth to go through. And it was interesting because in the past, it wouldn't even necessarily have to be a monumentally bad day. It could just be, slight discomforts that you can receive throughout the day. And we could easily mask that by simply, going to the bar for a drink or going out and getting some street tacos. And you might not even necessarily acknowledge that you're satiating some pain or you're trying to suppress some pain with those little experiences until you don't have anything to run to except to face all those micro inequities that you're sort of feeling. And that's kind of what happened to us in Colombia. And it was a pretty rough time. And we had days where we were lying in bed watching Netflix on our computer. We didn't really have, bouts of crying. Just things weren't going the way that we'd hoped. And we were really, really close to saying, we're done with Debt-Free Guys and Queer Money. We can no longer financially sustain the business, let alone it's putting gray hair on both of our heads. It's too much of a roller coaster of emotions. And, we kind of figured out our way out of those feelings and decided to continue to do the business. Did I cover all that, Mr. Auten?
Yeah, I guess I'll just add there were so many emotions associated with it. I think, what I said earlier about not feeling like we were doing well with the podcast, this, I think, was times 10. It seemed like every aspect of our business was not succeeding. And John and I, starting back in 2015, would wake up at 4:00 in the morning and we would put in a couple of hours of work, and then we would go to work, and then we would come home and we would work until 9:00 at night. And this was kind of basically our schedule all the way through the middle of April 2018. We were doing all of this because we wanted to build a business that would provide some value to the community. And it felt like such a slap in the face. Honestly, I said this in that podcast episode that I crawled into bed and I started to cry, and I felt completely rejected by the community that I had been trying to support all along and help. And what I had to finally realize is the community wasn't rejecting me. It was all of the attachment that I had put on what I thought this business or what I thought we as a couple should be doing or how we should be succeeding based on the outward appearance of what I think everybody expects of us. And it was really what it really came down to is I need to take care of myself. And then I need to take care of the community, because if I take care of the community will eventually take care of me. And so I had to get back to this idea that I'm not being rejected. Sometimes it's just the message that's being rejected.
Mm-hmm. And in that episode, you talked a little bit about what helped you pull out of it for each of you. And you talked a little bit about spirituality and Eckhart Tolle, but because this show is called The Queer Spirit and it's something we talk about more, I wonder if you're willing to share a little bit more about your own spiritual practices or beliefs and how they really helped you pull yourself out of the hole.
Sure. So for years, we had sort of been practicing our own version of the miracle morning. So we were doing meditation, we were doing reading, we were exercising and journaling, doing all that stuff. It wasn't until we were in Colombia that we really realized how important that was, and how, I don't want to say we were doing it wrong, but we weren't necessarily doing it right. I don't really know how to phrase that better than that. But it wasn't until we were in Colombia and we had no other attachments to turn to that we could really go deeper in our meditation, that our journaling, I think, at least for me, I don't read David's journal, but my journaling got a little bit more honest and real. It was only then that when we would recite affirmations that I sort of had that real emotion tied to it. It was more than just reciting affirmations. I could feel the emotions and the desire and see the dream. And so it kind of allowed us to take everything, I think, to a deeper level. We had, in hindsight, I guess it all seems kind of ironic, but at that time, I had just finished reading a book called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, and David was in the middle of reading it. And then I was in the middle of reading Eckhart Tolle's book, A New Earth. And so these experiences, us kind of taking all these practices to a deeper level, plus, reading these particular books, it kind of really highlighted to us that, we could really take our spiritual practice to the next level, and we could start to see the value in doing that. And I really think that, we couldn't walk down the street and get a coffee. We couldn't walk up the street and get a decent glass of wine. We had no friends to turn to, at least that we could talk to face to face. So it was only, and there were sometimes that we couldn't talk to each other because, it would get contentious or we would just be too emotional. And so it was only, I think, because of having these practices to turn to and thinking to ourselves, we've got to really make these work for ourselves. We've got to take these a little bit deeper, where we're able to sort of, I guess, come out of that negative experience feeling positive and feeling that there was still some hope.
Is there anything you want to add, David?
Yeah, I'll add a little bit. I think that John mentioned this idea of us following certain practices. I think that they had not really been a practice, right? The whole idea of practicing is you do something so that you can eventually succeed at it, or that you win, or that you become the best that you can be at it. And I think for us that they just became habitual. Okay, let's do our 10 minutes of meditation. Let's read our books. Let's journal. And it wasn't heartfelt to a certain degree. And this really forced us into a heartfelt situation. I'm a worrier. Just that's the kind of human being that I am. I worry a lot, and I worry a lot about money. And so this became it started to drag on me, and I started to really feel worthless. And so then when we started to reflect on it, and I started to actually really take this into consideration and really think about how I was feeling when I was meditating and letting go of things, I had the most amazing experience when we were meditating one morning. And I have never felt like this before. I was raised in a very, very religious household, but I struggled to believe in God. But at one point in my meditation, I literally felt like there was a group of people standing around me, hugging me. And literally, it was almost like somebody whispered in my ear and said, everything is going to be okay. And it was just this crazy experience. And since then, I don't worry about things as much as I used to. I don't worry financially. I feel like someone in the universe is looking out for me, whether it's the universe itself or God or whoever you want to believe it is. I know who I believe it is, but I just believe that practice and us taking it deeper is what really allowed me to become satisfied with what's going on in my life right now.
Yeah, we were also reading, I think I was reading Mike Dooley's Playing the Matrix at the time. And one of his chapters talks a lot about how people get so focused on how they're going to get to what their goals are or how they're going to achieve their aspirations. And he refers to them as the cursed house. And what we need to do, and what David and I are getting better at, and hopefully we'll get better at doing is focus on, we know what the goal is and have the confidence that we're going to actually achieve that goal and not get so hung up on the cursed house. Because, for example, that bank backed out of sponsoring our tour in the Rocky Mountain region. Well, it was only because they backed out and we were forced to stay in Pennsylvania a little bit longer than we had originally planned. Did other opportunities, bigger opportunities, open up to us? And at the time when that bank backed out, we just couldn't see any future for ourselves. And now the future is brighter than it would have been had we stuck with what our original plan was, what our how in terms of getting to our accomplished goal.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like this experience not only helped you on the level of your business, but both personally and as a couple, which sounds really important that you were moved through that experience with the support of your spiritual practices in a very mindful way to allow it to open you up on all these levels.
Yeah, I think fortunately for David and me, both when we confess to each other our financial situation and what we believe how the universe works, we're very much on the same page, so we can really support each other. And, when we were paying off our debt, it wasn't always easy. And sometimes one of us would be feeling better about things than the other, and we were able to lift each other up. Same thing with kind of getting through this time in Columbia, Pennsylvania, and working on our spiritual practice. We're kind of on the same page there. We can kind of help each other along, share what's working for us and what's not working for us, and provide support to each other. And I think that's the benefit of being in a relationship, right? Is having somebody there to hopefully help you become a better version of yourself.
I want to move on to talk a little bit about another recent episode that you did, which was talking about surprising stats about the financial wellness of the LGBT communities. And I'm wondering if you could just share a few highlights from that episode with our listeners about what's preventing the communities, the LGBTQ community specifically, from achieving financial security.
Well, it was a whole hour-long episode, so I could probably rattle off a whole bunch of stats, but I think I'll probably maybe highlight just a couple. One of the things that we were surprised by, and this is a study that was done, or a survey that was done by Prudential. They looked at populations of individuals all across the United States, and they had a segment of individuals who self-identified as queer. And what they found is that 50% of the individuals that they had surveyed who identified as LGBTQ did not have a basic banking product like a checking or savings account. And when we don't have a checking or savings account, it may not seem like a big deal, but if you don't have one, you're actually paying more for the transactions that everyone else is doing. So if you're having to go get your check cashed at a check cashing service, if you're having to get a money order for paying your rent or some bill, all of that costs you more than someone who has a checking or savings account. So for whatever reason, we as a community, there are individuals who have chosen to or are living on a cash lifestyle. And at times, spending with cash can be beneficial, but for when you're doing your basic financial transactions, you're going to spend more. It's actually digging you deeper into a hole. And so our community needs to get comfortable with this idea that banks and financial services companies out there do want to help us. They want to help us improve. They want us, of course, it's profitable for them, but they also understand that it does help us as a community improve. Our community is falling behind when it comes to the amount of money that we earn, and some of that is associated with the fact that we just don't understand or are not comfortable with basic financial transactions and understand them. That's part of the reason why we give the education that we do, is we need to become more comfortable with those kinds of institutions. One of the other things is, in this particular survey, 27% of the individuals said that they were participating in their employer-sponsored retirement plan or had a retirement account. So that means 73% of the community is not planning ahead for a better financial future. And the reality is that 80% of us do not plan on or will have children. We won't have familial support when we are old. And so the reality is, as a community, we are living longer. We are that many of the things that were holding us back age-wise, and such as the HIV epidemic, individuals who are now living with HIV and AIDS much longer. And so there are individuals in our community now who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and they don't have that familial support. They didn't plan ahead for their financial future, and now they're living off of the government. And in some places in this country, that means that they're being separated from the ones that they love, that they've been spending their life with, because they can't afford to go into a care facility that respects them as a queer couple. And it also means that there are individuals in our community that are having to go back in the closet as older individuals. They have to go back to living a life of being scared. And that's because we didn't plan ahead financially. So please plan ahead financially. That's one of our biggest things.
So going back to the first stat that you gave, I'm wondering if you have any sense of why people are not using banks.
I think there are a couple of reasons why people aren't using banks. I think MassMutual did a study a couple of years ago that I think is indicative of why. They found that about 60% of the LGBTQ community doesn't trust financial services or banks, simply because we think that the financial services company or the financial services professional either doesn't want to or doesn't know how to help us. So I think that's one challenge. And in mine and Dave's experience, we know that's not necessarily true with a lot of financial services companies and professionals. That I'm sure that there are cases where that is true, but it's not broadly accurate. We do know that there are some struggles that our transgender community is suffering with in terms of, unfortunately, there are laws, federal laws that are on the books, such as the Patriot Act, that require a person to identify themselves, and things need to match up: your gender, your name, social security number. And because they don't want to be referred to as their dead name, or they don't want to have to explain their situation to somebody, a stranger who they feel will probably be judging them, they oftentimes don't broach that topic. We are working with some banks to try, to the extent that they legally can, to accommodate for that. But those are maybe just two examples of why our community is struggling that way.
I would say just one thing on that last point there. There are several banks that are doing an amazing job with trying to help transgender individuals be able to identify themselves by the name and the gender of their choice. As John mentioned, there are legal things that they cannot change. But for one, we know that Capital One and Chase are both banks that allow individuals to identify and use the name when they're interacting with you, when you call them on the phone, when you work with someone in their office. They will allow you to identify with the name of your choice, with the gender of your choice. Now, your paperwork and what they're submitting, of course, legally, that has to be, but at least they recognize. There are some institutions that don't even want to recognize. At least these are institutions that are trying to recognize and help the community make progress until we can figure out a legal way around this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would also be curious to know, and you probably don't know the answer to this, but based on those stats of people not using banks, if they vary from state to state or city to city in areas where communities are more open to LGBT communities or not.
That would be interesting. We didn't see that sort of micro level data, so I don't know if that exists. I do know that they captured where people lived, so there might be a way to figure that out, but we haven't seen that information.
Yeah, so the data that came out of the Prudential study showed that 51% of those who were surveyed that were identifying as LGBTQ lived in cities that were 250,000 or larger. But that meant that there were 49% that were in small towns, medium-sized cities. And we do know from some anecdotal experiences that individuals have had a difficult time in banks. There was a recent study out of the University of Iowa that was highlighted on NBC. And actually, I think it was the Hornet who brought it to our attention, that the social platform, the Hornet, brought it to our attention, that over the last 20 years, same-sex couples were 73% more likely to be denied a mortgage. So there are instances where discrimination is happening, and that's why we encourage individuals to look for these institutions that are trying to do good by them, because they will back them up. And that even comes to disciplinary action to employees that are not doing right by their customers, because all of us can be their customers, and all of us should be treated equally. They believe that. If an individual doesn't, they can go.
Yeah. Well, I feel like we could talk about this more, but in starting to wrap up, can each of you share with us a person, practice, or experience that has supported your queer spirit to flourish?
I guess this is kind of cliche that we've talked about it, but I know that my life wouldn't be where it is today without the person who I'm sitting next to. I've gone through a lot of struggles in my life, coming from a family that rejected me, and just seeing what has gone on in the world, being at the tail end of the HIV AIDS epidemic and seeing how people in our community were treated. And I just have carried a lot of heaviness with me throughout my life. And a lot of that has been taken away, and a lot of brevity has been brought into my life because of John. And I absolutely wouldn't, I know I wouldn't be here if he wasn't here.
Well, so this is going to be more cliche than I thought it was going to be. Earlier when you proposed this question, I was like, we can't say Madonna or Oprah. That's too cliche. So I was going to say David as well. I mean, I don't think that one of the challenges that I've always had when I was younger was that I didn't really see a lot of gay couple role models. There's an element of me that didn't think that it was even possible for gay couples to be together for life, because I never saw that. Obviously, there are many other reasons for that than just the fact that didn't exist. And it wasn't until being with David that I actually saw myself that I could have the opportunity to be with somebody for life, that I could build a whole life with someone, and I wouldn't want to be doing with anybody else. And it's been inspiring to me. I think if it wasn't for David, I probably wouldn't have come out to my family. If it wasn't for David, I definitely wouldn't have built the business that we've built to help our community. I don't think we would be having this kind of impact in anyone's life, let alone our own. So yeah, I'll have to say David as well.
So can you share with us how our listeners can work with you, be in touch, and find out about your offerings and your work?
Sure. We are the Debt Free Guys everywhere you would search for us. Our website is debtfreeguys.com. On Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, we are Debt Free Guys. We also have the Queer Money Podcast, which you can find on iTunes and SoundCloud and other things soon. We're coming to Spotify soon. And then, we have a lot of information on our website, a lot of free information to access. So if you have anything in particular that you're looking for, you can access it by going to debtfreeguys.com. We do have our signature course is our credit card payoff course that includes our unique debt lasso method to pay off your debt faster than most other plans will help you do. We only open the doors to that course a couple of times a year, and we will be opening it up again in September 2019. And then on our shop section, you can find some other information of other tools that can help you out, such as our Budget Buster bundle, and we have a couple other new products coming out soon as well.
I'll just add, we also have the Queer Money Facebook group. And one of the things that John and I are passionate about is encouraging the community to start talking about money. We love talking about everything else, sex, pop culture, politics, but money is such an integral part of our lives, and it has a huge impact on our physical and mental health. And so if we can start to begin to thrive financially, other aspects of our lives will start to thrive as well. So we love having conversations in the Facebook group. This is where people can ask questions. We talk about wins. We talk about challenges. We encourage everyone to be open and honest in the group. It's a closed group, so no one's going to be able to see your comments unless they're a part of the community. So we encourage you, if that's all the step you want to take, you can just come and check out the conversations that are going on there.
Well, thank you guys for holding this platform for the community at large, and thank you for being here and sharing your stories.
Thank you so much for having us. We appreciate it.
We appreciate it.
I work with many queer folks who struggle to get their needs met or who suffer from having their boundaries violated by others. Because you may not have been cared for the best, you might have a hard time identifying your needs. Or because you have been violated or bullied, you might not completely understand where exactly your boundaries are. If you'd like some help exploring your needs and building more resilient boundaries, head over to my website and download the free guide, Needs, Boundaries, and Self-Care Support for Queer Folks. This is a short introduction to help you start to shift and change your relationship to yourself and others, and to feel more safe and resourced day to day. So just head over to queerhealingjourneys.com/needs to download your free guide today. To find the resources we discussed today, find the show notes at thequeerspirit.com. And if you enjoyed the show, remember to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. This will help us reach and support more queer people all over. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.